A quiet woman runs a small bookstore until a public shaming shreds her dignity. A powerful stranger steps in with money, a plan, and a single, shocking promise: revenge. What looks like a rescue is stranger and darker than it seems. Old betrayals, hidden deals, and a secret that could ruin more than one life. The town must choose sides, and the cost of winning might be higher than anyone imagines. Will the promise of revenge save her, or will it destroy the very thing she's trying to protect? The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the town hall chamber, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. Evelyn Hart adjusted her reading glasses and smoothed her cardigan, a nervous habit she'd developed over her 25 years running Hartwell Books. The familiar scent of her lavender hand cream mingled with the mustiness of the old building as she settled into one of the hard wooden chairs. She tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear, noticing how the chamber's ornate clock ticked steadily above the doorway, marking minutes that somehow felt both too slow and too fast. Her thoughts drifted to the cozy shop she'd left just an hour ago, with its worn leather armchairs and shelves reaching to the ceiling. She'd inherited the store from her mentor, Margaret, and had poured her heart into maintaining its warm, welcoming atmosphere. Just that morning, she'd helped young Tommy find the perfect book for his science report and left a birthday card on Mrs. Peterson's regular order of mystery novels. The card had a watercolor lighthouse on it, something she knew Mrs. Peterson would appreciate after losing her husband, who had been a lighthouse keeper for 40 years. The shop was more than just a business, it was home. And with her mother Rose growing frailer each month, needing more care and attention, Evelyn couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The town needed its bookstore, and Rose needed her daughter close by. Just yesterday, Rose had struggled to remember what day it was, but her eyes had lit up when Evelyn read aloud from their favorite childhood story. Those moments were precious beyond measure, irreplaceable in a way Evelyn could never explain to someone who valued only profit margins. Around her, familiar faces filled the chamber. The barber whose shop had been there since 1967, the couple who ran the bakery and always donated day-old bread to the community shelter, and several young families drawn by promises of community improvement. The wooden benches creaked as people shifted, their whispers creating a gentle hum of anticipation. The murmur of conversation died down as Lydia March stepped up to the podium. Even in the fading daylight, Lydia's pearl necklace gleamed, matching her crisp white blazer. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor with authority. Her perfectly highlighted hair caught the light as she arranged her notes with manicured hands that bore a large diamond ring, a remnant of her recent divorce that she wore like armor rather than sentiment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the planning committee," Lydia began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Our town stands at a crossroads. The state has offered us an unprecedented opportunity for growth through their revitalization grant program." Her practiced smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she gestured to colorful charts projected onto the wall behind her. Evelyn listened carefully, making notes on her small notepad. The shop's property taxes had been creeping up, and she hoped the meeting might offer some solutions for small business owners. Her pen moved methodically across the page, capturing key phrases while her mind calculated what another tax increase would mean for the educational programs she ran for neighborhood children. But as Lydia continued, her polished tone took on a harder edge. "However, certain elements in our business community seem determined to obstruct progress." Her gaze fixed directly on Evelyn, lingering there with unmistakable intent. "We can't let sentimental relics hold us ransom to the past." A sudden hush fell over the room. Someone coughed nervously. Evelyn's pen froze mid-word as her chest tightened. The fluorescent lights seemed suddenly too harsh, exposing her like an unwelcome spotlight as 24 pairs of eyes darted between her and Lydia. "The future of our downtown requires bold vision," Lydia continued, her words sharp as icicles. "Small, cozy nostalgia cannot be the anchor for our future. We need businesses that can compete in the modern marketplace. We need establishments that draw tourist dollars and create Instagram-worthy moments, not dusty corners where 3 people sip tea all afternoon." Several people shifted in their seats. Mr. Jenkins, who bought his Sunday paper from Evelyn every week for 20 years, stared at his shoes, the bald spot on his head flushing red with discomfort. Mrs. Thompson, whose book club met monthly at Hartwell Books, touched her throat in distress, twisting the small pendant Evelyn knew contained a photo of her late daughter. Evelyn raised her hand, trying to keep it steady. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she gathered courage. "If I might respond, the committee has reviewed the revenue projections." Lydia spoke over her, voice rising. The PowerPoint flipped to a new slide with red and green bars. "The numbers speak for themselves. We cannot afford to protect outdated business models out of mere sentiment. The grant requirements are clear about minimum revenue expectations." Heat crept up Evelyn's neck and into her cheeks. She tried again, pushing past the tightness in her throat. "The bookstore's community programs are irrelevant to the economic realities." Lydia cut in smoothly, clicking to the next slide without even glancing Evelyn's way. "Now, moving on to the proposed timeline for property reassessments and potential redevelopment opportunities." The rest of Lydia's words blurred as tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes. Her hands trembled as she gathered her notepad and purse, dropping her pen twice before managing to retrieve it from beneath her chair. She couldn't bear to meet anyone's gaze as she stood and walked quickly toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the charged silence. The wooden floor that had been polished by generations of townspeople seemed to mock her with each creaking step. Outside, the coastal wind had picked up, carrying the sharp scent of salt and incoming rain. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, mirroring the storm building inside her. Evelyn fumbled with her car keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. The metal felt cold against her trembling fingers. A few stragglers from the meeting were emerging from the building, but she couldn't face their pitying looks or awkward attempts at comfort. Mr. Henderson started toward her, mouth opening to speak, but then seemed to think better of it and turned away. She slid behind the wheel, hands gripping tightly as tears spilled down her cheeks. Through the windshield, the town hall's warm lights seemed suddenly cold and unwelcoming. The historic building that had once represented community now felt like a fortress of exclusion. The wind rattled the car as she pulled away from the curb, the building's imposing facade shrinking in her rearview mirror while raindrops began to spatter against the glass. 25 years of careful stewardship, of building community, of knowing every customer's reading preferences and family stories, reduced to sentimental relics and outdated business models in front of the entire town leadership. The humiliation burned in her chest as she drove through the darkening streets, past the shuttered storefronts and towards home. Shop windows that once housed thriving family businesses now stood empty, with "For Lease" signs collecting dust in their corners. Was Hartwell Books destined to join them, become just another hollow space where memories once lived? The rain fell harder now, blurring the streetlights into watery halos as Evelyn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She would need to check on her mother, prepare dinner, and somehow find the strength to open the shop tomorrow morning with a smile. But tonight, just for this moment in the privacy of her car, she let herself feel the full weight of what had happened, and what might yet come. Evelyn moved through the shop like a ghost, her motions mechanical after 25 years of closing routines. The brass bell above the door had jingled its last cheerful welcome over an hour ago, but she'd let the warm lamplight stay on, casting honey-colored pools across the wooden floors and worn book spines. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened a stack of paperbacks. The familiar scent of old pages and leather bindings couldn't quite settle her nerves tonight. Behind the counter, sales slips and bookmarks lay in their usual ordered chaos, waiting for tomorrow's customers, if they still came after tonight's public humiliation. "You're not alone in this, you know." Marta's voice was steady and warm as she emerged from the children's section, a box of returned books balanced on her hip. She set it down and crossed to where Evelyn stood, wrapping one arm around her shoulders in a quick, firm hug. "Those fancy suits at town hall don't know the first thing about what this place means to people." Evelyn managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Marta." She squeezed her friend's hand, grateful for the younger woman's unwavering support. Marta had started as a part-time clerk 7 years ago and had become as essential to the shop as its shelves. The bell chimed softly, and Mr. Donnelly shuffled in, his weathered sailor's face creased with concern. Behind him came Clara Thompson, one of the local elementary school teachers, clutching a stack of papers to her chest. "Heard what happened at the meeting?" Mr. Donnelly said gruffly. "Load of nonsense, if you ask me. This shop's been here longer than that March woman's been alive." Clara nodded earnestly. "My whole class loves story time here. Just yesterday, Tommy couldn't stop talking about the space book you helped him find. This place matters to people." Their kind words brought fresh tears to Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you both. Really." She couldn't manage more without her voice breaking. After they left, the phone rang, the old-fashioned landline she kept because Rose preferred it to cell phones. "Evelyn?" Her mother's voice was thin but alert. "Sarah next door said there was some trouble at the meeting. Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine, Mom." Evelyn tried to keep her voice steady. "Just a difficult discussion about downtown development." "Don't forget there's chicken soup in the freezer," Rose said. "And that casserole Mrs. Peterson brought over. You need to eat something." "I will, Mum, I promise." After hanging up, Evelyn watched Marta gather her things to leave. "Get some rest," her friend advised. "Tomorrow's another day, and we'll figure this out together." Alone in the quiet shop, Evelyn finally let herself sink into one of the old leather armchairs. The radio hummed softly from the corner. Classical music tonight, the gentle strains of violin seeming to echo her melancholy mood. Lydia March's words kept circling in her head. Sentimental relics. Outdated business models. Holding us ransom. Each phrase stung anew, like salt in an open wound. With a sigh, she opened her laptop. The screen's glow felt harsh in the lamplit shop as she searched for the grant documentation Lydia had mentioned. The official website was a maze of PDFs and government forms, full of dense paragraphs about urban renewal and economic revitalization. Nothing jumped out as obviously wrong, but something about the whole situation felt off. Her phone buzzed, a text from her brother David. "Just heard about the meeting. You okay? Want me to come up? This weekend." She typed back. "I'm fine. Just tired. We'll call tomorrow." Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the distinctive smell of an approaching storm. Waves crashed against the seawall 2 blocks away, their rhythm as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She'd grown up with that sound, just as she'd grown up among these books. Evelyn moved through her closing routine, checking the register, turning off the computer, adjusting the blinds. In her small kitchen at the back of the shop, she heated a bowl of her mother's soup, but barely tasted it as she ate. The first drops of rain began to patter against the windows as she gathered her things. Each step of her routine felt heavier tonight, turning off the warm lamps that had welcomed readers all day, checking the locks on the windows, setting the security system. At the front door, she paused. The brass bell waited silently above her head, its familiar presence somehow reassuring. She'd weathered storms before, literal and figurative, and she would weather this one too. The humiliation of the evening still burned, but underneath it, something else was taking root. A quiet, stubborn determination. The bell jingled one last time as she stepped out into the night. The empty street echoed with the sound as she locked up, rain beginning to fall in earnest now. The storm was rolling in from the sea, but the shop stood solid and steady as it had for decades, its windows dark but its foundations strong. The morning sun streamed through the bookshop's front windows, casting warm rectangles of light across the worn wooden floors. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, glittering like tiny stars above the shelves of well-loved books. At 9:15, the shop hummed with its usual breakfast crowd, a mix of regulars who treated the place like a second living room and curious tourists who'd discovered this cozy corner of town while wandering the coastal streets. Mrs. Chen, with her silver-streaked hair pinned neatly back, sipped her jasmine tea by the travel section, carefully marking pages in a guidebook about Italy with colourful sticky notes. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she planned what would be her first vacation since her husband passed. Near the children's corner, 7-year-old Lucy sprawled on her stomach, her small feet kicking lazily in the air, surrounded by a fortress of picture books, while her mother, Amanda, browsed nearby, occasionally glancing over with a soft smile. The coffee station that Marta had set up years ago, despite Evelyn's initial hesitation, burbled steadily, filling the air with the rich, comforting scent of fresh brew that somehow made the books smell even better. In the far corner, partially hidden by the philosophy shelves with their leather-bound classics and modern paperbacks, sat Nathaniel Calder. Though he'd been in town for years, living in that renovated lighthouse property on the cliff, he remained something of a mystery. The kind of person everyone knew of, but few really knew. His grey suit was expertly tailored but understated, his leather briefcase well worn but clearly expensive. His salt-and-pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture spoke of discipline without stiffness. Everything about him spoke of quiet authority rather than flash, wealth that whispered instead of shouted. Evelyn moved between the shelves, straightening books with gentle, caring touches and greeting customers with practiced warmth, though her smile didn't quite reach her tired eyes. The previous night's humiliation at the town hall still sat heavy in her chest, a cold weight that made even the familiar comfort of her beloved shop feel somehow fragile this morning. "The morning rush helps," Marta murmured as she passed, carrying a fresh pot of coffee, the steam rising in lazy curls. She bumped Evelyn's shoulder gently with her own. "Keeps your mind off things, at least for a little while." Evelyn nodded, grateful for her friend's steady presence. The simple truth in those words was exactly the kind of practical comfort Marta always provided. She'd just finished helping a customer find a specific leather-bound edition of The Great Gatsby, with the original cover art when she noticed Nathaniel Calder approaching the counter. He moved with deliberate grace, each step measured and purposeful, like someone who planned everything in advance. "Ms. Hart," he said, his voice as careful as his appearance, with a gentle depth that matched his composed demeanor. "I've been meaning to compliment your philosophy section. The balance between accessible introductions and deeper works is particularly well curated. Not many bookshops get that right." "Thank you, Mr. Calder." Evelyn's tone was polite, but guarded. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit from childhood. She'd seen him in the shop before, always quiet, always observant, often buying books, but rarely engaging beyond brief pleasantries. He glanced around, ensuring no other customers were within earshot, his eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency, then said something that made Evelyn's heart skip. "I'll help you get your revenge." Evelyn let out a short, disbelieving laugh, the kind that comes from surprise rather than humor. Excuse me? Against Lydia March, he clarified, his voice low and steady, his gaze unwavering. I saw what happened at the town hall meeting last night. The way she manipulated the process against you. Did you now? Evelyn's voice took on a sharp edge, her fingers absently straightening a stack of bookmarks on the counter. And why would you want to help me? Do you know Ms. March personally? Have some old score to settle? Nate's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief shadow that suggested depths beneath the calm surface. I've been involved in various philanthropic projects over the years. I have experience with protecting smaller institutions from certain types of aggressive development, places that matter to communities. The morning bustle continued around them, the clink of coffee cups against saucers, the rustle of pages being turned, the quiet murmur of conversations about books and life. But Evelyn felt as if she and Nate were in their own bubble of tension, the sounds somehow muted around them. That's not really an answer, she said, meeting his gaze directly, her chin lifting slightly in challenge. No, it's not. He agreed, with a small nod that acknowledged her perception. I'd prefer to explain more fully in private. Would you be willing to meet this afternoon? Say, around 3, after your lunch rush dies down? Evelyn studied him carefully, trying to read beyond the polished exterior. His clothes spoke of money, but not flashy wealth. His manner was direct, but not threatening. The lines around his eyes suggested someone who'd seen his share of life's complications. Still, years of running a business in a small town had taught her to be cautious of unexpected offers that seemed too convenient. Why should I trust you? She asked plainly, her hands resting flat on the counter between them. You shouldn't, not yet, he replied, and the honesty of that response caught her off guard. But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say, and what I might be able to do. From behind the coffee counter, Marta wiped a mug with unnecessary thoroughness, watching the exchange with barely concealed interest. She knew her friend well enough to see the conflict playing across Evelyn's face, the natural suspicion warring with desperate hope for any solution to their current crisis. Marta raised an eyebrow in silent question when Evelyn glanced her way. After a long moment, during which the only sound between them was the turning pages of Mrs. Chen's guidebook, Evelyn nodded. 3 o'clock then, but here in the shop, where Marta can keep an eye on things, not somewhere private. Of course. Nate inclined his head slightly, respect evident in the gesture. Thank you for your time, Ms. Hart. I look forward to our conversation. He turned and walked toward the door with unhurried steps, the bell chiming softly as he left. Marta was at Evelyn's side in an instant, coffee pot still in hand. What was that about? Mystery man finally spoke more than 10 words? I'm not entirely sure, Evelyn admitted, watching through the window as Nate disappeared down the street, his figure blending into the morning crowd of shoppers and locals. But I guess I'll find out at 3 o'clock. He says he wants to help with the Lydia situation. Help how? Marta frowned, her protective instincts visibly kicking in. And why? That, Evelyn said, turning back to the shop that now felt both like a sanctuary and a battleground, is exactly what I intend to find out. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dunes as Evelyn pulled up to the small cottage. Located at the quieter end of Beach Road, the rental property sat nestled among wild beach grass and weathered fences. The sound of waves provided a gentle backdrop to her arrival. Nate opened the door before she could knock. Thank you for coming, Ms. Hart. Please, come in. The cottage's interior surprised her. Not the flashy display of wealth she'd half expected, but a thoughtfully arranged space with comfortable furniture and local artwork. Large windows faced the ocean, and a few carefully chosen books sat on the coffee table. Would you like some tea? he offered, gesturing to an already prepared tray. Yes, thank you. Evelyn settled into an armchair, noting how the whole setup felt calculated to put her at ease. You mentioned revenge this morning, Mr. Calder. I'd like to know exactly what you meant by that. Nate poured tea into simple ceramic cups. First, I should explain who I am. He handed her a cup and sat down. I made my fortune in tech, software development, specifically. But that's not why I'm here. He paused, looking out at the dunes. 30 years ago, I was at my lowest point. I'd dropped out of college, couldn't find work, and was literally down to my last few dollars. I wandered into a bookstore in Boston, just trying to get warm, really. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, His voice softened. She saw right through me, gave me a job, let me sleep in the stockroom, helped me get back on my feet. Evelyn watched him over the rim of her teacup. What happened to her? She passed away while I was building my company. I never got to... He cleared his throat. I never got to properly thank her, or repay her kindness. And now you want to help me to settle that debt? Not exactly. Nate set his cup down. I've spent the last decade funding community revitalization projects, the right kind, not what Lydia March is proposing. I know how these situations usually play out. Small businesses get pushed out, communities lose their heart, and developers make a fortune. So what exactly are you proposing? I can provide resources, legal support, PR expertise, community organizing help. But, he held up a hand, not for revenge, for justice. There's a difference. Evelyn set her cup down firmly. If you're suggesting some kind of public takedown of Lydia March, no. Nate interrupted. That's not what I mean at all. Good, because I won't be part of that. Evelyn straightened in her chair. I won't trade one form of humiliation for another. Whatever we do has to be about protecting the community, not destroying anyone. A small smile touched Nate's lips. That's exactly why I want to help you, Ms. Hart. You understand what's really at stake here. What's your plan? First step would be bringing in Claire Montgomery. She's an attorney who specializes in community preservation cases. She can review the grant paperwork, look for irregularities in the process. Meanwhile, we could organize a modest fundraiser, something that reminds people why places like your bookstore matter. No dramatic gestures, no drama, he confirmed. Just careful, methodical work to protect what matters. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. The waves crashed softly outside, and somewhere a seabird called. Why should I trust you? Because I'm not asking you to trust just me. Every step we take will be transparent. You'll meet Claire first, approve every decision. I'm offering resources, not control. Evelyn stood and walked to the window. The dunes stretched out before her, unchanging despite all the development around them. Finally, she turned back to Nate. I have conditions. Of course. First, no public humiliation of anyone. Second, everything we do has to serve the whole community, not just my shop. And third, I want to know everything that's happening. No surprises. Nate stood and extended his hand. You have my word. Evelyn shook his hand, feeling an odd mixture of relief and unease. It felt strange to fight power with power, even if the cause was just. Nate walked to a small desk and retrieved a business card and a piece of paper. My contact information and Claire's details. She can meet with you as early as tomorrow morning. Taking the items, Evelyn nodded. Thank you, Mr. Calder. Nate, please. At the cottage door, Evelyn paused. The late afternoon light painted the dunes gold, and she could see her shop in the distance, its familiar shape an anchor in the changing landscape. Goodbye, Nate, she said quietly, and made her way back to her car. The drive back to the bookstore was short, but it gave her time to think about what she'd just agreed to. The weight of the business card in her pocket felt like both a lifeline and a responsibility. She parked behind the shop, knowing she needed time to process everything before facing her customers again. Morning light streamed through the bookstore's windows, casting warm patches on the wooden floors. Claire Montgomery sat at a corner table, her laptop open and a neat stack of papers beside her. She had arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, dressed in a simple navy suit that spoke of quiet competence rather than flash. Evelyn watched as Claire reviewed the town meeting video on her laptop, noting how the attorney's expression remained neutral even as Lydia's cutting words filled the quiet shop. "Sentimental relics," she called us, Evelyn said softly, straightening a row of bookmarks on the counter, as if decades of serving this community meant nothing. Claire paused the video and looked up. "How long has your shop been here?" 32 years. I took over from Mr. Peterson when he retired. He used to say books were like lighthouses. They help people find their way home." Claire nodded, jotting notes in precise handwriting. "And the grant paperwork you found?" Evelyn retrieved the documents she'd printed. "It's mostly technical language. I couldn't make much sense of it." Claire's eyes scanned the pages quickly, her finger tracing certain lines. These timelines seem unusually compressed. Typically, there's a mandatory public comment period of at least 60 days. She tapped a date. This shows only 30. The bell above the door chimed as Nate entered, carrying 3 cups of coffee. He distributed them before settling into a chair nearby. "There's something else," Claire continued. "The supporting documentation references an LLC I've never seen in local development projects, Coastal Heritage Partners." Nate's hand paused midway to his coffee cup. "What did you say?" "Coastal Heritage Partners. It's listed as a consulting entity on the grant application." The color drained slightly from Nate's face. "We need to check the municipal records. Now." At the town clerk's office that afternoon, the small space smelled of old paper and furniture polish. The clerk, a helpful woman named Janet, pulled the requested files without question when Claire presented her credentials. They spread the documents across a worn wooden table. Claire methodically compared dates, noting discrepancies in her neat handwriting. "The original submission dates don't match the filing stamps," she murmured. "And look, the grant recommendation was processed in 3 days. Previous applications took weeks." Nate was scanning another document, his jaw tightening. "Here it is again, Coastal Heritage Partners, and look who signed as managing director." Claire leaned over. "Marcus Hale?" Evelyn noticed how Nate's hands clenched slightly at the name. "You know him?" "We were partners, years ago." Nate's voice was controlled, but Evelyn saw something flash in his eyes. An old pain, sharp as broken glass. For a moment he seemed lost in memory. 2 men in an office, a handshake, promises made and broken. Then he blinked, and his professional mask returned. "Marcus specializes in rapid development projects," he explained quietly. "He buys up properties, pushes through rezoning, and flips them for massive profit. The communities always lose." Claire was already making notes. "These shell companies, the rushed timelines, it's a pattern. But we need more proof before we can challenge anything officially." "What kind of proof?" Evelyn asked. "Paper trails, email records, meeting minutes." Claire closed her notebook. "We'll need to file some Freedom of Information requests, carefully worded, and we should look into similar projects in other towns where these entities operated." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Whatever we do, it has to help everyone affected, not just my shop, and we have to handle it right. No shortcuts, no accusations we can't prove." "Agreed," Claire said. "I'll start the document requests tomorrow. We'll build our case carefully, properly." As dusk settled over the town, Evelyn and Nate closed up the bookstore. The evening air carried a hint of salt from the harbour, and the first stars were appearing above the rooftops. "We'll need to organise some community support," Nate said, watching as Evelyn turned the key. "In the lock. A fundraiser, maybe. Something quiet but meaningful. Show people what's really at stake." "I know just the right approach," Evelyn replied. "We could host a local authors' night. Readings, discussions about community and change. Nothing flashy, but it would remind people why places like this matter." Nate nodded. "We'll get started on that tomorrow. 2 days should be enough to organize something simple but effective." The streetlights flickered on, casting pools of warm light along the sidewalk. Evelyn touched the worn brass doorknob of her shop one last time, feeling its familiar shape under her fingers. Today had revealed both allies and enemies, but more importantly, it had shown her a path forward, one that might protect not just her store, but the heart of her community. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town green as volunteers set up folding tables and arranged stacks of books. Evelyn watched her neighbours work together, their breath visible in the crisp autumn air. "These go here?" asked Mr. Donnelly, the retired sailor carrying a box of paperbacks. "Perfect," Evelyn replied, helping him arrange the books in neat towers. Romance novels with well-loved spines stood next to mystery paperbacks, their covers catching the morning light. Marta had transformed the children's corner into a magical space. Colourful blankets spread across the grass, and hand-painted signs announced, "Story time every hour." She'd hung paper lanterns from low tree branches, making the area feel like a fairy tale come to life. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked goods drifted from a nearby table where Mrs. Chen from the cafe arranged pies and cookies. Her teenage daughter Sarah carefully wrote price tags in neat handwriting. "My first paycheck from the cafe," Mrs. Chen said, adjusting a display of blueberry muffins. "I bought my Sarah Goodnight Moon. She still has it." Nate worked quietly in the background, speaking with town officials about permits and directing the setup of sound equipment. He'd funded everything but kept his involvement subtle, letting the community take center stage. By mid-morning, the green hummed with activity. Clara, the young teacher, stood near a petition table, explaining to parents why the bookstore mattered. Last year, when Tommy struggled with reading, Ms. Hart helped find exactly the right books. Now he's reading 2 grade levels ahead, she said, her voice warm with conviction. Mr. Donnelly gathered a small crowd, his weathered face animated as he shared stories. 50 years ago, I was just a kid who loved the sea. This shop had every sailing book I could want. The owner then, she'd set aside anything with boats for me." Children sprawled on blankets as Marta read from Where the Wild Things Are, her voice rising and falling with the story. Parents snapped photos, while toddlers acted out the wild rumpus, their giggles floating across the green. At the bake sale, neighbours exchanged stories over coffee and homemade pie. "Remember when the shop stayed open late during the blackout?" Those reading circles during COVID. The memories flowed like warm honey, sweet and sustaining. Petitions circulated, gathering signatures. Flyers outlined the importance of preserving small businesses, their simple message resonating with the crowd. Our town, our future, our choice. Around 2 o'clock, Rose arrived, supported by her caregiver. Evelyn helped her mother to a comfortable chair near the storytelling area. Rose beamed as she watched children clutching new books, their faces bright with excitement. "Just like you at that age," Rose said softly to Evelyn. "You couldn't wait for story time?" The afternoon passed in a blur of warm moments. A local author read from his latest work. Children proudly showed off their craft projects from Marta's activity table. The petition sheets filled with signatures. and the donation jar grew heavy with bills and checks. Through it all, Lydia's absence spoke volumes. Regular attendees of town events noticed, exchanging meaningful glances and whispered conversations. As the sun began to set, volunteers packed up tables and sorted leftover books. Inside the shop, Evelyn counted the day's proceeds while Marta and a few others celebrated with cups of tea. "We did good today," Marta said, squeezing Evelyn's shoulder. "Really good." The final numbers exceeded their hopes, enough to help with legal fees and show solid community support. But the real victory wasn't in the money. It was in the stories shared, the connections strengthened, the sense of purpose restored. Later that night, Evelyn sat in her favorite reading chair at home, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of success. The day's images played through her mind. Children's delighted faces, neighbors hugging, books finding new homes. Her community had shown up, not just with their wallets, but with their hearts. She thought of her mother's proud smile, of Marta's tireless energy, of Nate's quiet support. The shop wasn't just her dream anymore, it belonged to all of them. That knowledge settled around her like a warm blanket as she drifted off to sleep, feeling truly at home for the first time since the town hall meeting. In her bedroom, a stack of signed petitions sat on her desk, tomorrow's work waiting. But for now, she let herself rest in the certainty that she wasn't fighting alone. Monday morning brought a fresh sense of purpose to the bookstore. Claire sat at a corner table, her laptop open and legal pads spread around her like a paper fortress. She typed rapidly, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she submitted formal records requests to various municipal departments. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced around her determined figure. "We need everything," she explained to Evelyn, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Building permits, zoning variance applications, grant proposals. Any official document from the last 18 months. Even the smallest detail might be the thread that unravels this whole thing." Evelyn nodded, watching as Claire meticulously organized her notes into color-coded sections. There was something comforting about Claire's thoroughness, a steadiness that made their daunting task seem possible. Across the room, Nate spoke quietly on his phone, his low voice barely carrying across the space. His shoulders were tense as he coordinated with his investigation team. He jotted names of shell companies on a notepad with his neat, precise handwriting. Coastal Development Holdings, LLC, Maritime Future Investments, Atlantic Progress Partners. The list grew longer with each call. "Yes, I need you to trace every connection," he murmured into the phone, his eyes meeting Evelyn's briefly. "Follow the money. All of it." Evelyn worked at her own desk, the familiar surface worn smooth from years of use. She carefully updated the petition with fresh signatures from the weekend's fundraiser, each name representing another ally in their fight. Her heart swelled as she organized a growing stack of letters from community members, teachers describing literacy programs that had blossomed within these walls, parents sharing stories of children discovering first books, elderly customers telling how the shop delivered during lockdown when they couldn't leave their homes. "These testimonials matter," Claire said, pausing her legal work to review them. Her voice softened as she held up a child's crayon drawing of the bookstore. "They show the human impact. This isn't just about buildings and zoning. It's about what this place means to real people." Tuesday brought an unexpected breakthrough. A municipal clerk, Sarah Henderson, came into the shop just before closing. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, her eyes darting nervously around the space. She twisted her hands anxiously as she approached Claire, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing repeatedly at the door as though expecting someone to follow her in. "But what's happening isn't right. I couldn't sleep knowing I had information that might help." Evelyn quickly flipped the open sign to closed and led them to the back office. The small room felt safe, removed from prying eyes. She prepared tea, the familiar ritual helping to calm Sarah's obvious nerves. Steam rose from the mugs as Sarah's story unfolded. Over chamomile tea served in mismatched mugs, Sarah described how Lydia had systematically pressured the planning department to expedite certain approvals, bypassing normal procedures. She'd suggest quiet solutions for small business owners who might object. Sarah explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. Nothing illegal exactly, but... Sarah's voice trailed off, her eyes troubled. She'd find ways to offer incentives or hint at problems that might arise if people didn't cooperate. I've watched good people give up their businesses because they couldn't fight back. Claire documented everything, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad, her expression neutral despite the damning information. Would you be willing to sign a statement? Your testimony could make all the difference. Sarah hesitated, staring into her tea as though searching for courage. Then she nodded, her shoulders straightening with resolve. Someone needs to speak up. This town deserves better than backroom deals. Wednesday's discoveries came through financial channels. Nate's forensic accountant, David Chen, arrived with thick folders of bank records and corporate filings tucked under his arm. The afternoon sun was fading as he spread his findings across Evelyn's counter after hours. Look at these payment patterns, he said, his finger tracing complex pathways across spreadsheets and diagrams. Money flowing through multiple entities, all registered in tax-friendly states. Here, then through this subsidiary before circling back. Classic funneling technique. They're trying to hide something big. Claire examined the highlighted transfers, her sharp eyes narrowing as she connected patterns. They're trying to obscure the source and destination of funds. But why go to such lengths for a small-town redevelopment? The complexity suggests something more significant than just rebuilding a few storefronts. The question hung in the air as they continued poring over documents well into the evening, the shop's lamps casting warm pools of light in the growing darkness. That evening, as they reviewed findings, Nate and Evelyn found themselves sharing stories over coffee. The shop was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old building settling. He spoke about his early days in tech, working from a tiny apartment with barely enough space for his computer equipment. His eyes grew distant with memory. I lived on ramen and determination, he said with a small smile. Everyone thought I was crazy. She described inheriting the shop from her mentor, learning the business one precious day at a time, making mistakes and discoveries in equal measure. I was terrified, she admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I'd loved books all my life, but running a business was different. Rose, my mentor, she believed in me before I believed in myself. Books saved me once, Nate said quietly, his usual composed demeanor softening. A bookstore owner who saw past my shabby clothes let me read for hours in a corner without buying anything. He'd say, "Knowledge doesn't care about your wallet." That kindness, it changed everything for me. Evelyn nodded, understanding the profound impact such simple acts could have. Their shared silence was comfortable, filled with mutual respect and growing friendship. Thursday brought the final piece of the puzzle. Claire burst into the shop, the bell clanging wildly as she rushed in, waving a stack of papers. Her usually calm demeanor was animated with excitement. "We found the connection," she announced, spreading the documents across the nearest table. "One of the shell company trustees, the signature here and here, it matches the corporate filings from Marcus Hale's firm. He's been hiding behind layers of paperwork, but there's no mistaking his involvement." Nate's face tightened at the name, his jaw clenching visibly. Marcus always did prefer working through proxies. He likes to keep his hands clean while others do the dirty work." There was history in his voice, old wounds that hadn't fully healed. That evening, they gathered again at the shop. Marta arrived with bags of homemade sandwiches, her practical kindness providing nourishment for their tired bodies. "You can't fight corruption on empty stomachs," she declared, setting out napkins with motherly efficiency. While they ate, Claire and Nate organized their findings into a clear presentation, arranging documents in logical sequence, highlighting key points, and creating visual aids that would help explain the complex situation to community members. "We need to request a public forum," Claire said, brushing crumbs from a folder. "Present this evidence to the community. The people deserve to know what's happening behind closed doors." Evelyn watched them work, feeling the weight of what was coming. The comfortable quiet of her shop, with its familiar smell of books and wood polish, would soon be the center of a storm. Children wouldn't be browsing for stories while this battle raged. But as she looked at the evidence spread before them, the documents, testimonials, financial trails, she knew they had to proceed. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter how uncomfortable. "Let's request the forum," she agreed, her voice steadier than she felt. "The community deserves to know. This isn't just about my shop anymore, it's about how decisions are made in this town." Claire drafted the formal request with careful legal precision, while Nate made calls to reserve the town hall, his authoritative voice ensuring they secured a date that weekend. They would present their findings then, bringing everything into the light where secrets couldn't survive. As they packed up for the night, Evelyn straightened books on nearby shelves, a habitual gesture that helped her think. Her fingers lingered on familiar spines, drawing comfort from their solid presence. The shop had always been her sanctuary, a place of stories and possibility. Now it was becoming something else, a symbol of resistance, a rallying point for the community, a stand against those who valued profit over people. Nate paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. The night outside was dark, but the shop remained a pool of warm light. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. "Once we take this step, there's no going back." Evelyn looked around at her beloved shop, at the worn wooden shelves and comfortable reading chairs that had witnessed countless stories unfold, at the wall of children's books where young readers discovered new worlds and possibilities. This place had been her home in all the ways that mattered. "Yes," she said firmly, squaring her shoulders. "It's time. Some things are worth fighting for even when you're scared." The town hall filled quickly that Saturday evening. Wooden chairs scraped across the floor as people squeezed into rows, their winter coats rustling. The usual municipal meeting crowd had swelled to include shop owners, retired teachers, and young families. Faces Evelyn knew from years of recommending books and wrapping birthday presents. At the front table, Lydia March arranged her papers with practiced precision, her silver bracelet catching the fluorescent light. Her red blazer stood out against the wood paneling, a spot of calculated authority. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying that familiar polish. "We're here to discuss concerns about our town's forward progress." "Actually," Claire interrupted smoothly, rising from her seat, "we're here to present evidence of procedural irregularities in the redevelopment process." She nodded to Nate, who began distributing thick packets of documents to the crowd. Lydia's smile tightened. "I hardly think—" "Please refer to page 3, Claire continued, her tone professionally neutral. "You'll see permit application dates that don't align with standard processing times. Note especially the variance request filed on March 15 that was somehow approved March 16, a Sunday." A murmur rippled through the room. Claire walked them through the documents methodically, highlighting discrepancies in timestamps, missing signatures, and most damaging, the web of shell companies traced back to Marcus Hale's firm. These entities, Claire explained, seem designed to obscure both ownership and financial flow. Why would a straightforward town development project need such complexity? Throughout the presentation, Evelyn watched her neighbors' faces shift from confusion to concern to anger. Mr. Donnelly, the retired sailor, squinted at the papers through his reading glasses, shaking his head. Young parents who brought their children to story time exchanged worried glances. 3 business owners took turns reading anonymous statements about pressure tactics, hints about expedited approvals for those who supported the plan, subtle threats about unfortunate delays for those who didn't. My family's restaurant has been here 30 years, one statement read. Suddenly our annual permits became complicated. Problems appeared that had never existed before. Lydia's composure began to crack. Her pen tapped an increasing rhythm on the table as Claire laid out more evidence. When questions turned to specific dates and trustee names, she shuffled her papers, voice rising. "You're missing the larger picture," she insisted. "This is about progress, about saving our town for future generations. We can't let sentiment—" "Sentiment," a voice cut through from the back. Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner market, stood up. "My children learned to read in that bookshop. Is that just sentiment?" More voices joined in, sharing stories of what the bookstore meant to them. The young teacher Clara described how Evelyn helped her build a classroom library on a tight budget. A teenager talked about finding refuge among the shelves during difficult days at school. Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest as she listened. When she finally stood to speak, the room hushed. "Books hold stories," she said simply, "but a bookstore holds a community. Every spine on our shelves represents someone's journey, someone's comfort, someone's hope. That's not sentiment. That's the fabric of who we are." The applause started softly, then swelled until it filled the chamber. Faces turned toward her with encouraging smiles, heads nodding in support. The town council chairman called for order and proposed a motion to pause the redevelopment pending independent review. Hands shot up across the room. The vote wasn't even close. As people began gathering their coats and papers, trading quiet conversations about what they'd learned, Evelyn caught Nate's eye across the room. His usual reserved expression had softened into something warmer. She saw in his slight smile both relief at their success and something gentler, pride, perhaps, or admiration. Claire packed her briefcase, looking satisfied. "Clear evidence and human stories," she said. "That's what changes minds." The energy in the room felt electric with possibility. Neighbors lingered to chat, making plans to stop by the bookstore, suggesting fundraising ideas. Someone mentioned a children's reading festival for spring. Evelyn stood by the door, accepting hugs and kind words from people filing out. The cold January air swept in each time the door opened, but she felt wrapped in the warmth of community support. "We did it," Marta whispered, squeezing her arm. "We all did it," Evelyn replied, watching her neighbors disperse into the winter evening, carrying their copies of evidence and their renewed sense of connection. The streetlights cast long shadows across the snow, but the darkness felt less threatening now. Together, they had turned on the lights. The morning paper landed on Evelyn's doorstep with a thud that seemed to echo through her bones. "Tech philanthropist's dark past, questions surface about Nate Calder's business ethics," screamed the headline. Below it, a grainy photo showed younger workers leaving an office building, boxes in hand. Her hands trembled as she read. The article painted Nate as a ruthless corporate raider who had orchestrated mass layoffs before a profitable merger years ago. Each paragraph twisted facts into accusations, transforming business decisions into moral failings. The selective retelling felt calculated, designed to wound. Her phone buzzed. Claire's text was brief. "Have you seen it?" Inside the bookshop, the morning light felt different. Thinner somehow. Marta arrived early, her face tight with concern. "They're saying awful things about Nate online," she said, setting down her purse. "People are sharing the article everywhere." The mail brought its own blow. A formal letter citing building code violations at the shop. Minor things. A loose handrail, outdated emergency lighting, paint peeling on the back door. But the threat was clear in the closing paragraph. Failure to address these issues promptly may result in significant fines unless a cooperative approach to redevelopment is reached. Evelyn's hands clenched around the paper. Just yesterday, they'd felt so strong, so united. Now, the morning crawled by with uncomfortable silences. Regular customers came in, but conversations felt strained. Mrs. Chen from the market stopped by, wringing her hands. "My cousin on the planning board," she whispered. "He says maybe we should stay quiet for now, not make trouble." Around noon, Nate appeared at the shop door. His usual composed demeanor had cracked. Deep lines creased his forehead, and his shoulders slumped slightly. "I need to explain," he said quietly. They sat in the reading nook, away from browsing customers. Nate's voice was low, heavy with remembered pain. "The merger, it wasn't like they're saying. We tried everything to save those jobs. I spent months looking for alternatives." He pressed his fingers against his temples. "But the market crashed, and our main contract cancelled. If we hadn't merged—" He trailed off, looking older than Evelyn had ever seen him. "Your foundation," Evelyn said gently. "Will this hurt it?" Nate's laugh was bitter. 3 trustees have already called to express concerns. The board wants an emergency meeting." He pulled out his phone, showing an email from a major donor putting their grant on hold pending review. Claire arrived mid-afternoon, her briefcase bulging with papers. Her usual calm efficiency seemed strained. "We need to be strategic now," she said, spreading documents across the reading table. "A defamation case could drag on for months, maybe years. The legal costs alone. Can we fight it?" Evelyn asked. Claire's sigh held volumes. "We can. But Lydia's smart. She's not making direct accusations, just raising questions. And she has resources. The development group's backing her fully." Outside the shop windows, people hurried past, some glancing in with uncertain expressions. A few regular customers had cancelled their standing orders that morning. The community's confidence, so strong yesterday, seemed to be evaporating like morning mist. "I've let you down," Nate said quietly. "I wanted to help, but I've made things worse." Evelyn watched a young mother hesitate outside the shop, then hurry her children past without coming in. The weight of isolation settled back around her shoulders, heavier than before. "We all believe in what we're doing," she said, but her voice wavered. Her phone buzzed again, another message from a local business owner begging off from the petition drive. "Need to think about my permits." The text read, "Hope you understand." The afternoon light faded early, winter shadows creeping across the shelves. Claire packed up her files, promising to work on response strategies. Nate left shortly after, his usual straight-backed posture notably absent. Alone in the darkening shop, Evelyn touched the spines of her beloved books. Yesterday's victory felt like a dream, replaced by the cold reality of power pushing back. Lydia had transformed their moment of triumph into ammunition, using it to isolate and divide them. The code violation notice sat on her desk, its threats thinly veiled between bureaucratic phrases. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shop's old windows. The sound seemed to mock yesterday's hopeful applause, replacing it with whispers of doubt and fear. Marta helped close up, trying to sound optimistic about tomorrow, but they both felt it. The shift in the air, the way Lydia had changed the game. What had felt like a community standing together now felt like exposed individuals, each wondering who would be targeted next. Evelyn locked the door, the bells jingle hollow in the empty street. Through the window, she could see the newspaper in a nearby trash can, Nate's story still visible in bold, accusatory type. The warmth of yesterday's victory had been replaced by something colder, more isolating. Lydia had turned their moment of strength into a weapon, and now they all felt the sting of its impact. Monday morning arrived with the thud of legal papers being served. Evelyn's hands shook as she read through the defamation complaint. Lydia's lawyers had crafted 30 pages of allegations, each more cutting than the last. "They're saying we deliberately spread falsehoods," Claire explained over the phone, her usual steady voice tight with concern. "They're asking for damages that could bankrupt the shop." The local paper ran the story on the front page. "Downtown drama. Developer sues bookstore owner." Below it, a smaller headline twisted the knife. "Tech philanthropist's past raises questions." Marta arrived early, her face drawn. "My cousin says they're targeting anyone who helped with the fundraiser. What if they come after my family's cafe next?" Evelyn squeezed her hand. "We'll figure something out." But by Tuesday morning, the pressure had doubled. A thick envelope arrived from her landlord, a notice of lease violations with a 30-day cure period. The implied threat was clear: pay up or get out. "It's coordinated," Claire said, reviewing the paperwork. "They're using every pressure point they can find." The shop felt emptier than usual. Regular customers texted apologies. "Taking a break from coming in. Need to lay low for now." Even Mr. Donnelly, the retired sailor who'd spoken so movingly at the fundraiser, hurried past with just a quick wave. Nate's situation was deteriorating faster. His company's stock had dropped 12% since Monday. Business channels ran speculation about his judgment and stability. Old photos from his startup days appeared, alongside quotes from former employees. "The board wants me to step back," he told Evelyn during a brief Wednesday morning visit. His usual precise appearance had frayed, tie slightly askew, worry lines deeper. "My PR team says I'm becoming a liability." By Wednesday afternoon, Evelyn sat alone in the shop's office, calculator in hand. The fundraiser money, so hopeful just days ago, looked pitiful against the mounting legal costs. Claire's estimated defense budget made her stomach clench. "We have options," Claire said, spreading papers across Evelyn's desk. "We can fight back hard, countersue, take depositions, expose every inconsistency, or—" She paused. "We can try something different. Reframe this as a town issue, look for restoration instead of victory." Evelyn pressed her hands against her eyes. Her mother had called twice, worried about the news coverage. "I don't want you getting sick over this," Rose had said, her voice fragile with concern. The shop's bell jingled as another customer turned away at the door. Marta was reorganizing the same shelf for the third time, trying to look busy despite the empty aisles. "How many small businesses have received similar notices?" Evelyn asked. 6 so far," Claire replied. "All after speaking up at the forum." The afternoon light slanted through dusty windows, highlighting empty chairs where reading groups usually gathered. The community board, usually cluttered with local notices, held only official announcements. The heart of the shop felt muted, scared into silence. Nate's foundation announced he was taking a leave to address personal matters. The press release read like a surrender, carefully worded to distance the organization from controversy. Wednesday evening, Evelyn locked up early. The street outside was quiet, too quiet for a normal weekday. Through other shop windows, she saw worried faces, people who used to wave now turning away. She thought of her mother, of Marta's family, of all the small businesses being squeezed. The weight of responsibility pressed down. Pride said fight. Practicality whispered caution. The shop's warm lights, usually so welcoming, now felt like a target. Her phone buzzed, another trustee withdrawing support from the legal fund. The screen showed her dwindling bank balance, a stark reminder of vulnerability. Nate had stopped taking calls, his usually prompt responses now delayed or routed through lawyers. His last message was brief. Need time to think. Sorry. Claire's legal folders sat heavy on the desk, full of options that felt increasingly impossible. Fight and risk everything, or seek another way forward? The question echoed in the empty shop as darkness gathered outside. A week ago, they'd stood together, voices raised in unity. Now they stood alone, picked off one by carefully aimed pressure. Lydia's strategy was working. Isolation bred fear, fear bred silence. Evelyn touched a shelf of beloved books, stories of courage and perseverance. But real courage, she was learning, sometimes meant facing hard truths. The shop had survived decades by adapting, by choosing its battles carefully. She looked at the latest threat letter, then at the photo of her mother on the desk. Rose looked so fragile in the image, smiling but tired. The shop was more than just a building. It was security, stability, home. The street outside had grown dark. Through the windows, she could see other shops closing early, their lights winking out one by one. The silence felt heavy with unspoken worry, with community bonds stretched thin by fear. Somewhere in town, Nate was probably poring over similar papers, weighing similar choices. His retreat from public view spoke volumes about the pressure they faced. They'd sought justice but found themselves outmaneuvered, their victory turned to vulnerability with surgical precision. Evelyn gathered her coat, each movement feeling heavier than usual. Tomorrow would bring more decisions, more pressure. For now, the hollow quiet of the shop echoed the isolation they all felt, each person wondering who would be targeted next, each trying to find their own path forward in the growing dark. The evening rain fell in a gentle mist, turning the porch lights into soft halos. Evelyn sat wrapped in her old cardigan, watching droplets collect on the porch railing when she heard the crunch of tires on her gravel driveway. Nate emerged from his car without an umbrella, his usual precise appearance softened by the rain and darkness. He looked older somehow, more human than the confident businessman who'd first offered help. "I hope it's not too late," he said, climbing the porch steps. His voice carried an unfamiliar weight. "Tea?" Evelyn offered, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. He sat heavily, running a hand through his damp hair. "I owe you the truth about why I'm here, why I really offered to help." The rain intensified, creating a curtain of privacy around the small porch. Evelyn waited, sensing the importance of his silence. "Years ago, there was another bookstore. Different town, similar situation." His words came slowly, measured. "The owner, Margaret Chen, she'd helped me when I was young and broke. Let me read for hours, slipped me damaged books she couldn't sell." Evelyn noticed his hands, usually so steady, fidgeting with his sleeve. "When developers came, I had the means to help. I had influence. But I was focused on building my company, worried about local politics." He swallowed hard. "I told myself someone else would step in. By the time I realized no one would, it was too late." The rain drummed steadily on the porch roof as he continued. "Margaret lost everything. The store, her apartment above it, her community. She moved away to live with her daughter. I tried to contact her later, to make amends, but—" He shook his head. "She'd passed away." "That's why you approached me," Evelyn said softly. When I said I wanted to help you get revenge, that was wrong. It wasn't about you at all. It was about my guilt, my need to fix the past. He met her eyes directly. I'm sorry for that. Evelyn's throat tightened. I understand guilt. She whispered. Every time Mom forgets to eat because I'm working late. Every time Marta worries about her job security. Every time I have to choose between building repairs and new inventory. Her voice cracked slightly. The shop isn't just a business. It's security for my mother's care, Marta's livelihood, a home for so many people. And I'm so afraid of failing them all. You're not failing anyone, Nate said quietly. Aren't I? Look at us now, more isolated than ever. The legal threats, the fines, the pressure on other businesses. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Sometimes I wake up feeling so ashamed, wondering if I should just give in. The screen door creaked open, and Marta appeared with a tray of steaming mugs. Thought you both could use this, she said, setting it down. And the community board is full of messages. People want to help, they're just scared. How do you always know exactly when to appear? Evelyn managed a small smile. It's my superpower. Marta winked, adjusting the tray. Oh, and Mrs. Rodriguez from the cafe says she's still with us, whatever happens. She's lived through worse. After Marta left, they sat in comfortable silence, warming their hands on the mugs. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. Your idea about a restorative hearing, Nate said finally. Instead of more legal battles, tell me more. It's not about winning anymore, Evelyn explained. It's about healing the town, finding a way forward that preserves everyone's dignity, even Lydia's. Nate nodded slowly. No more press releases, no more public spectacle. Just honest conversation about what this town needs. All voices heard, all concerns addressed. She turned to face him. But I can't ask you to stay. Your foundation, your reputation. I'm staying, he interrupted firmly. Not for revenge or redemption, because it's right. The rain had cleared, leaving the air fresh and clean. Somewhere in the distance, a porch light flickered on, then another, small beacons in the darkness. Thank you for telling me about Margaret, Evelyn said softly. Thank you for showing me a better way forward, he replied. They sat together in understanding silence, watching the town lights multiply in the clearing night, each small glow a reminder of the community they were fighting to preserve. Monday morning's sun filtered through the bookstore windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. At exactly 10 o'clock, Claire spread her legal pad on the reading table where Evelyn, Nate, and Marta had gathered. A restorative hearing is different, Claire explained, her voice steady and clear. It's not about winning or losing. It's about truth-telling and making things right. Marta nodded, taking notes. How do we explain that to people who are used to courtroom drama? We focus on 3 things, Claire said, writing them down. First, everyone speaks their truth without interruption. Second, those who caused harm acknowledge impact. Third, we work together on practical solutions. Evelyn pulled out her reading glasses, studying the draft invitation Claire had prepared. The language feels right, dignified but not threatening. Nate had been quietly making calls all morning. He looked up from his phone. I've found a mediator, Sarah Chen from the Coastal Justice Center. She has experience with small town disputes and development conflicts. Chen? Evelyn asked softly, remembering his story from the night before. Margaret's daughter, he confirmed with a slight nod. She said she'd be honored to help. They worked through the morning, drafting guidelines for testimony. Claire emphasized the importance of specific examples rather than general grievances. Marta organized a schedule for practice sessions with nervous business owners. Remember, Claire advised as she reviewed their testimonies, Stick to facts. How the pressure affected your business, your employees, your families. No accusations or name-calling. By afternoon, Evelyn had written her opening statement 3 times. I keep wanting to add more, she admitted to Nate as they shared a quick lunch. But maybe simple is better? Your sincerity matters more than fancy words, he agreed. Tuesday brought a steady stream of responses. The town clerk offered the community centre for Thursday evening. Several municipal officials agreed to attend, though some seemed wary. Small donations arrived to cover the mediator's fees. $5 here, $20 there, each with a note of support. Marta organized the contributions in a careful ledger. Look at this, she said, showing Evelyn. Mrs. Rodriguez from the cafe, Mr. Donnelly, even some high school students pooling their allowances. Mid-morning, Claire received Lydia's response. She'll come, Claire announced, but she's requested her lawyer be present as an observer. That's fair, Evelyn said, though her stomach tightened. Everyone should feel safe to speak. Nate spent Tuesday afternoon meeting with local bank trustees about the Community Protection Fund. Complete transparency, he insisted. Public oversight, independent board, clear guidelines for supporting small businesses facing similar pressures. No more loan benefactors swooping in, one trustee asked with a slight smile. No, Nate agreed. Just neighbors helping neighbors with proper structures in place. By Wednesday afternoon, the community center buzzed with preparation. Volunteers arranged chairs in a circle rather than rows, a physical reminder that this wasn't a trial. Sarah Chen arrived early to walk through the space. The layout matters, she explained. We want to encourage conversation, not confrontation. Evelyn watched as Marta posted simple ground rules on easels. Speak your truth. Listen without judgment. Focus on repair. What if it doesn't work? She whispered to Nate as they reviewed the final arrangements. What if people just want revenge? Then we try again, he said simply. But I think you're right about this town. They're ready for healing. Through the community center windows, they could see people stopping to read the posted notice about Thursday's hearing. Some lingered, talking in small groups. Others nodded thoughtfully before walking on. Claire joined them, holding a stack of printed programs. Everything's ready. Sarah will open with the purpose and guidelines. Affected businesses speak first, then municipal representatives. Lydia has agreed to respond. Then we move to solution building. And the Protection Fund announcement? Nate asked. After solutions are proposed? Claire confirmed. So it's clear this comes from community needs, not individual agendas. As evening approached, Evelyn stood in the empty community center, her footsteps echoing slightly. Tomorrow these chairs would be filled with neighbors, some angry, some afraid, all connected to this town's future. Marta appeared at her side. Ready for tomorrow? Evelyn touched the back of a chair, thinking of all the stories it would hold. I think so. Not because I'm certain it will work, but because it's right. That's enough, Marta said softly. That's always been enough. They left together, walking past the darkened bookshop windows where a simple sign announced, Closed Thursday evening. Join us at the Community Center for Truth and Restoration. The coastal wind carried the scent of salt and possibility. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight, in the quiet between preparation and outcome, Evelyn felt the rightness of this path, this choice to seek healing over victory, understanding over vengeance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town green as people gathered under the white canopy. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly, neighbors nodding to each other with a mix of apprehension and hope. The air held the tang of salt and expectation. Sarah Chen, the mediator, stood at the center of the circle. Her voice carried clearly as she explained the ground rules. "This is a space for truth-telling and healing," she said. "Each person will speak uninterrupted. We focus on facts, feelings, and solutions, not blame." The first speaker was Mr. Rodriguez from the corner cafe. His hands trembled slightly as he held his notes. "Last March, I received a letter suggesting my lease wouldn't be renewed unless I agreed to certain terms. My family has run this cafe for 20 years. My daughter learned to walk between these tables." More stories followed. Clara, the young teacher, described how the children's reading program would suffer without the bookstore's support. The hardware store owner detailed late-night calls pressuring him to sell, each testimony built upon the last, painting a picture of systematic intimidation. When Lydia March rose to speak, her usual polish seemed brittle. "Everything I did was for this town's future," she began, her voice tight. "We can't survive on nostalgia alone. The grants, the development, it was all meant to save us from becoming a ghost town." Claire stood then, holding a folder. "We have emails, Ms. March. Communications between your office and several shell companies." She read selected passages, each one landing like stones in still water. Dates that didn't match official records, promises of private deals, references to problem properties that needed creative solutions. The representative from Marcus's firm, a young lawyer in an expensive suit, shifted uncomfortably as financial trails were revealed. Each connection led back to familiar names, familiar patterns. Lydia's composure cracked. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "After David left, after the divorce, everyone was watching, waiting for me to fail. The development project was my chance to prove I could still make things happen." The silence that followed felt heavy with recognition. Not forgiveness exactly, but the painful understanding of human frailty. Sarah Chen stepped forward again. "Thank you for that honesty," she said gently. "Now let's discuss how we move forward." The remedial plan she outlined was comprehensive. An independent audit of all development processes, sanctions for verified violations, required mediation sessions for key parties. Lydia would step down from the redevelopment committee, but could earn back trust through therapy and community service. "Additionally," Sarah continued, "we propose creating a cultural heritage protection fund. This would provide resources and support for small businesses facing similar pressures in the future." Evelyn rose slowly, her prepared statement forgotten. "When this began, I wanted to fight back," she said simply. "But revenge just creates more wounds. What we need is to remember how to care for each other, to protect what makes this town special. Not just the buildings, but the connections between us." The vote was nearly unanimous. As Sarah read out the final tally, Marta squeezed Evelyn's hand. Around them, people were wiping eyes, reaching across aisles to clasp hands or offer tissues. Nate stood to announce his foundation's initial contribution to the protection fund, emphasizing the transparent oversight structure. But the money seemed almost secondary now to the deeper healing that had begun. Rose, who had insisted on attending despite her frailty, beamed at her daughter. "You did good, honey," she whispered. "You did real good." As the meeting concluded, people lingered in small groups, talking softly. The evening light had faded to purple, and someone had strung simple, white lights along the canopy posts. Their glow caught the tears on Lydia's cheeks as she spoke quietly with Sarah Chen. Evelyn watched her neighbors, not celebrating exactly, but sharing something profound. The recognition that they had chosen a harder, braver path than vengeance. They had chosen to rebuild. The coastal breeze carried the scent of salt and healing as the town green slowly emptied, leaving only the soft glow of lights and the whispered promise of restoration. Monday morning arrived with paperwork and purpose. The municipal council chambers, usually quiet this early, buzzed with activity as clerks processed the mediator's formal recommendations. Claire sat with 3 council members, methodically explaining each point. The independent audit will examine all development applications from the past 18 months, she said, spreading documents across the polished table. We'll need full access to records and staff cooperation. By Tuesday afternoon, official notices went out. Lydia's resignation from the redevelopment committee was requested, pending completion of mediation and ethics review. Her office door remained closed as she packed personal items into a cardboard box, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped a small crystal award in tissue paper. At Marcus's firm, investigators arrived without fanfare. They requested files, interviewed staff, and placed holds on active development plans. The sleek corporate lobby, usually bustling with deals in motion, fell unusually quiet. Meanwhile, the bookstore hummed with renewed energy. Wednesday morning found Mr. Donnelly, the retired sailor, balanced carefully on a ladder while touching up the shop's weather-worn sign. Below him, Marta directed a small crew of volunteers who had shown up with paintbrushes and determination. "A little more blue on the serif there," she called up, squinting at the lettering. "We want it to last through winter storms this time." Inside, Evelyn and 3 regular customers cleared space for a new literacy corner. They assembled simple pine shelves while children sprawled on the floor, sorting through donated picture books. "Look what I found." 8-year-old Tommy held up a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. "My dad used to read this here when he was little." Evelyn smiled, remembering Tommy's father as a shy boy who'd spent countless afternoons in these same corners. The memory strengthened her resolve as she headed to that afternoon's trust board meeting. The Community Protection Fund was taking shape in a conference room at the local credit union. Nate had arranged the seed money transfer with characteristic attention to detail. Now he sat back, letting local voices lead the discussion. "Small grants first," Clara, the young teacher, insisted. "Help with repairs, utility deposits, permit fees, the practical things that keep doors open." Mr. Donnelly nodded, paint still speckling his sleeve. "And we need clear guidelines, no repeating old mistakes with hidden processes." Marta took rapid notes while Evelyn watched the group work, feeling proud of how naturally they'd stepped into their roles as stewards. Thursday brought the first mediation session. Lydia arrived early, sitting stiffly in the waiting room of the community center. When Evelyn passed by on her way to a separate meeting, their eyes met briefly. Something vulnerable flickered across Lydia's face before she looked away. Later that day, Evelyn overheard snippets of Lydia's conversation with her therapist through an open window. "I thought I was protecting the town's future, but maybe I was just trying to prove something to myself." The work of repair continued in small ways throughout the week. Rose visited the shop Friday morning, moving slowly with her walker, but beaming at the fresh paint and new literacy corner sign that read, "Read and Repair," in cheerful letters. "It's not just about books anymore, is it?" she said, patting Evelyn's hand. "It's about mending what was broken." Nate handled the broader fallout with quiet dignity. He met with his foundation's board, explaining their role in the community trust. His focus remained steady: transparency, local control, and the patient work of rebuilding confidence. The goal was never revenge, he reminded them. It was restoration. By Friday afternoon, the temporary relief on the bookstore's fines had been formally processed. Evelyn filed the paperwork carefully, knowing it represented more than just financial breathing room. It was a symbol of the town's commitment to doing things differently. The shop closed early that evening for a small gathering of volunteers. They shared coffee and homemade cookies while discussing plans for next week's children's story hour. The newly painted sign caught the last rays of sunlight, its colours bright against the weathered brick. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching her neighbours talk and laugh. The victory didn't feel triumphant exactly. There was too much hard work ahead for that. But it felt right, like the first deep breath after a long storm. Marta appeared at her elbow with a fresh cup of tea. "You okay, boss?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly, accepting the warm mug. "We did this the right way." Through the window, she could see the town green where the restorative hearing had taken place. The space looked ordinary now, but something fundamental had shifted there. They had chosen a harder path than vengeance, but it was already bearing fruit in small, steady ways. The bell above the door chimed as the last volunteers left for the evening. Evelyn locked up, her movements unhurried. The shop felt solid around her, its foundations strengthened not just by fresh paint and financial relief, but by the web of connections that had proven stronger than fear or greed. Tomorrow would bring more work, papers to file, meetings to attend, trust to rebuild step by careful step. But tonight, in the gathering dusk, Evelyn allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had protected something precious without losing their own humanity in the process. The morning sun streamed through the bookstore's freshly cleaned windows, catching dust motes that danced above stacks of well-loved books. Evelyn adjusted the new Read and Repair poster, its cheerful letters announcing next week's volunteer program. 1 month had brought remarkable changes. Where tension once filled the air, warmth now flowed through the shop like honey. Children sprawled on colourful cushions in the reading nook, while parents browsed nearby shelves. The gallery wall, lined with black and white photos of town elders sharing their stories, drew frequent visitors who lingered to read the carefully crafted captions. "Miss Evelyn?" Tommy waved from his spot in the children's corner. "Can we put our art project up here, too?" The literacy group had grown from 3 children to 15, meeting every Wednesday afternoon. Their latest creation, a paper chain of book reviews, stretched across one wall, each link containing a child's careful handwriting. "Of course," she smiled, helping him find the perfect spot. "Right next to Mr. Donnelly's fishing stories." The bell above the door chimed as Clara, the young teacher, arrived with grant paperwork in hand. The Community Cultural Fund had awarded its first round of microgrants yesterday, small but significant sums that would help local artists and small businesses thrive. "The review board loved your proposal for the mobile library project," Clara said, spreading the documents on the counter. "Especially the part about reaching homebound seniors." A familiar envelope caught Evelyn's eye among the morning mail. Inside was a letter from Lydia, its tone markedly different from her previous sharp rhetoric. The mediated apology spoke of regret, of learning hard lessons about power and purpose. She had volunteered to help with the children's festival, accepting a background role without complaint. Marta read over Evelyn's shoulder. "Some folks are still wary," she observed. "As they should be," Evelyn replied. "Trust takes time to rebuild." The morning paper carried a small article about Marcus's firm facing regulatory fines. They had withdrawn from local development projects entirely, their reputation tarnished by the exposure of their tactics. It felt like a clean break, though Evelyn knew the town would need to stay vigilant. Around noon, Nate appeared without fanfare. No cameras, no press releases, just a man carrying a box of donated books. He had grown comfortable in the shop's quiet corners, often bringing paperwork to review while sitting in the worn leather armchair by the window. The foundation board approved the next round of funding, he mentioned as they sorted books together. All with proper oversight and community input, of course. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same volume. Neither pulled away immediately, comfortable in the brief contact. Their friendship had developed slowly, built on shared values and quiet conversations rather than dramatic gestures. "Rose is looking forward to tomorrow's reading," Evelyn said, shelving a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "So is half the town, from what I hear." Nate's smile reached his eyes. Mr. Donnelly's been practicing his pirate voices all week. The weekend brought perfect weather for the children's festival on the town green. Tents dotted the grass, each hosting different activities: storytelling circles, craft stations, and a small stage where local musicians played between readings. Rose arrived early, settled in her favorite chair near the main tent. She watched with bright eyes as children scampered between activities, their laughter carrying across the green. The retired sailor, Mr. Donnelly, held court with maritime tales, while Clara helped younger kids create their own storybooks. "Remember when you were that small?" Rose asked as Evelyn brought her a cup of tea. "Always with your nose in a book, even at the dinner table." "Some things never change." Evelyn smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. Nate appeared periodically throughout the day, helping move chairs or distribute snacks without drawing attention to himself. He and Evelyn worked in comfortable tandem, exchanging glances and small smiles as they kept the festival running smoothly. As afternoon settled into evening, Evelyn took her place in the reading circle. Children gathered around, some sitting on parents' laps, others sprawled on blankets in the grass. The familiar weight of a beloved book in her hands felt like home. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice carrying across the attentive crowd, "in a town by the sea." The story unfolded like a gentle wave, washing over the gathered families. Nate leaned against a nearby tree, watching with quiet appreciation. Rose beamed from her chair, surrounded by neighbors who had become family. This was what they had fought to protect, not just a building full of books, but the heart of a community. The shop stood solid behind them, its windows glowing warm in the settling dusk, a beacon of belonging for all who needed it. The town green had emptied hours ago, leaving behind only scattered paper programs dancing in the evening breeze. Inside the bookstore, Evelyn moved through her closing routine with practiced ease, though tonight each familiar task felt weighted with meaning. The brass bell above the door chimed its last cheerful note as Mrs. Peterson, clutching a new mystery novel, became the final customer of the day. "Such a wonderful festival, dear," she said, patting Evelyn's hand. "This place truly is the heart of our town." Alone now, Evelyn ran her fingers along the front display table, straightening books that had been eagerly thumbed through during the day's celebrations. A child's crayon drawing from the festival caught her eye. It showed the bookstore with a rainbow arching overhead, stick figures, holding hands in front. She smiled, remembering the dark days when Lydia's cruel words had echoed through the town hall, how that public humiliation had burned in her chest. "What a journey it's been," she murmured, carefully placing the drawing on the community bulletin board. The shop seemed to hold its breath around her, shelves of books standing sentinel in the soft lamplight. She thought of that first morning when Nate had offered to help her seek revenge. How different things might have been if they'd chosen that path. Instead, their choice to pursue restoration had rippled outward, touching the whole community in unexpected ways. The front door creaked open, and Nate stepped in, his presence now as familiar as the scent of old books and sea air. "Thought you might like some company while closing up," he said, helping her stack the returned books from the day's festival. They worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other with an ease born of shared purpose and growing understanding. No need for grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Their connection had deepened naturally, like roots spreading beneath quiet soil. "The children's faces today," Evelyn said, adjusting the reading lamp by the window. When Mr. Donnelly did his pirate voice, pure magic. Nate agreed, his smile gentle, though I think Rose's dramatic reading of Goodnight Moon might have stolen the show. Evelyn laughed, remembering her mother's theatrical gestures. She's always had a flair for performance. Even when I was little, bedtime stories were quite the production. They finished the closing tasks together, straightening chairs, organizing the day's receipts, setting out fresh bookmarks for tomorrow. Through the window, stars winked above the darkened street, and the distant lighthouse beam swept across the harbor in its steady rhythm. Walk you home? Nate offered, holding her coat. Outside, the spring air carried a hint of salt and flowering cherry trees. Their footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk as they made their way to Evelyn's house, trading observations about the day's events. No rush, no pressure, just two people who had weathered a storm together and found something valuable in the aftermath. At her front door, Nate's goodbye was simple, but warm. Thank you, he said, for showing me a better way. His hand briefly touched hers, and in that moment Evelyn felt the promise of future conversations, shared meals, and quiet evenings yet to come. Inside, Rose waited in her favorite armchair, a letter in her lap. This came for you during the festival, she said, holding out a pale blue envelope. From Sarah Thompson. You know, the young mother who just moved here? Evelyn sat on the ottoman at her mother's feet, opening the note with careful fingers. Sarah's handwriting flowed across the page. Dear Ms. Hart, before your literacy program, Tommy wouldn't touch a book. Now he insists on bedtime stories every night. You've given him more than just reading skills. You've shown him how stories can build bridges between people. Thank you for making us feel welcome here. Rose's hand came to rest on Evelyn's shoulder. You've done good, sweetheart. Real good. Later, tucked into bed with her mother's kiss still warm on her cheek, Evelyn thought about the months since that terrible town hall meeting. The journey from humiliation to healing hadn't been easy, but it had transformed not just the bookstore's future, but the very fabric of their community. In the morning, she would hang a new sign in the window, one she'd been working on for days. The letters were carefully painted in her best handwriting, simple words carrying profound meaning. All are welcome. As sleep approached, Evelyn smiled, remembering the festival's laughter, the warmth in Nate's eyes, the way her neighbors had come together to protect something precious. The bookstore's bell would ring again tomorrow, calling people home to stories, to connection, to second chances, and she would be there to welcome them all.